how do I know which faith? Because there's lots of different faith systems out there. How do I know which one is true? But here's the exact question so that everybody in the room can hear what was submitted online. Every church, every religion has a, quote, truth. And if you don't believe their, quote, truth, at the end, something bad's going to happen to you. How do you know that this Christian thing is, quote, true and not the other religions? Very honest question, deserves an honest answer. Go for it.
Great. I'm glad that I get all the easy questions every week.
You got 5 minutes to answer all of world religions in all of human history. Go.
Because God.
All right, next question.
Great. No, just kidding. That does apply, but let's look at a few things. One of the things that is obviously important to us as Christians is the Scripture, and we know that God gave us Scripture, and that Scripture is good for teaching, it is good for rebuking, it is good for learning, so on and so forth, that we are reminded so many times. But one of the things that's really important about the Word and what we have been given is the fact that God told us exactly what this relationship looks like, what our faith actually looks like. But one of the most impressive parts is if we look at all the world religions, all of them side by side, almost every single one of those talks about a God that is separate from its creation and does not seek to be part of it, but rather applies a bunch of rules and other things that those beings then have to do to attempt to become good enough to maybe, possibly, if you're really lucky, actually get to spend eternity with said deity at the end of that course. And our God is very different, because there's a few things that occurred. That we could go first to John 1:14. We see that the Word became flesh, dwelt among us. We observed his glory. The glory is the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. That right off the bat, the Word not only was provided to us so that we can understand the true character of God, but we know that Jesus is the Word, and other than being the Creator, also chose to be with us on this journey. We've talked about this a few times over the last few weeks. Of our faith is a personal faith. It's not a separated one. And one of the things we can look at here is Ravi Zacharias used to say, most other religions talk about climbing that mountain so you might have the opportunity to become close to your deity but never get there. But our God started on the mountaintop and descended to be with his creation.
That's good.
And there are no other faiths like ours. It's not like there's one or two that are similar but different. There are no other world religions where God sought to actually be with his creation. And that's a big piece to why this ends up being true at the end of the day. I'll get to the nuts and bolts of this because I'm an apologist and I absolutely love the other stuff.
We couldn't tell that about you over the last couple of weeks.
It doesn't show at all. But the other thing is we just know that the other thing is part of that personal relationship means that he's the only way. Mm-hmm. So you hear a lot that Christianity is exclusive. Well, this is one of those places we see this in John 14:6, we see that Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So again, we see a reminder of what and who God is the way, truth, and life, literally all of our being and existence. But there's no other way. You can't work your way in. You can't be good enough. You can't do all these wonderful things to show up. You're not reconciling to God. That's what Jesus is for. And that's why the gospel is so unique and different. So that's part of the uniqueness, but it also applies to why it is true. And one of my favorite sayings and one of my first pastors ever used to say is this, and that is, the more we dig out of the ground, the more we realize that the truth of scriptures is accurate. If you've ever heard none of this stuff in the historical Bible is true, no one can prove that, you have been lied to. The amount of actual archaeological evidence of instances throughout the historical Bible in terms of places, incidents, all the way down to fountains, like the fountain at Bethesda and things like that. We have found these things. We have dated these things with science and said, that happened, it was there when the Bible told us it was there. So if we have this preponderance of evidence of stuff, physical stuff, the faith part's easy by comparison. Mm-hmm. If you're not familiar, you can go back and look at Lee Strobel and Case for Christ and an example of a journalist that literally went from, okay, I'm going to go
disprove Christianity.
Right. I'm going to go find all these evidences that I've been told exist, and he found out by doing the work that they don't exist. The evidence actually does support the existence. And we could go on and on, but another thing that's really helpful for me is how many copies of the other text of other beings, religions, etc., do we have in comparison to Christianity? This is another lie you will hear a lot, because you'll hear not much. We don't have a lot of documentation of the Bible. Out of all the books in antiquity that we read in a scholarly sense or in a religious sense, the Bible is the most well-documented, least variated document of history ever. There's over 5,000 unique scripts of the New Testament alone, and the variation between them is so minimal. Do you know how many copies of Homer's The Iliad there are in existence? That we use to say, yep, that's exactly what Homer wanted us to understand of the Iliad? Any guesses? 11.
That's a lot less than 5,000.
And every single textual criticism historian on the face of the planet will tell you that that 11 variations is enough for us to know that Homer wrote exactly what he intended us to believe. We have 5,000, and we are told every single day that we don't have enough evidence. Just something to think about.